Hello everyone, I'm Alfian and today we are going to solve the Hackerrank challenge on the React section called the Employee Validation Challenge. And for this particular one, our task is to create a React app that helps employees validate and update their existing information through a survey form. The application requirements are detailed below and the finished application must pass all of the unit tests. And this is the appearance of the desired output from the form validation, and this is the detailed requirement. The employee validation form components collects employee details through 4 input fields, which is name, email, employee ID, and the joining date. And each input field should have validation logic to ensure that the data entered meets the specified requirements. So for this one, we are not allowed to edit the app.js, but we are allowed to edit the employee validation form.js, and also we can look over the app.test.js if something goes wrong later in this video. Okay, so let's do this by creating from these both requirements. We need some kind of state carrier of the data set data. For this particular state, why am I using the data instead of separate state of name, email, employee ID, and joining date? It's because I just want the more concise and the short one, so that's why I'm using the centralized useState data, and the data will carry all of the name, email, employee ID, and joining date, and also their respective error if there is any error on each field of the form. So let's declare the useState inside the curly brackets besides the import React, and import the useState hook that carries the name property equals to empty string, and then the email also empty string, and for the employee ID also empty string, and then the joining date, it's also an empty string for now. We can modify them later, but I am going to declare another state, which is the error of each state of the email, name, employee ID, and joining date, but that will be a little bit complicated if I use a separate state for each element there. So we are opted to use the initial state constant, initial state, and what I was doing from earlier is just by cutting the state, and then that way we can pass the initial state into the useState right here. And this initial state we will be using this one for resetting the input after successful submission of the form, if there are no errors at all. And then for this name property or field right here, we can declare the actual value which is the empty string, and also the error, just a boolean value. And for the initial state, we can declare true, so we can show the error we can show the error message below the form. We can do the same thing on the employee ID and the joining date and email, and that way below the user, below their respective form, there will be an error message like this one, and this is the initial state of the React component, I believe. And also, if you look closely, the submit button is also being disabled right here. So let's reread the detailed requirements right here. Employee validation form recomponents collects employee details through 4 input fields, which is name, email, ID, and joining date. And each input field should have validation logic to ensure that the data entered meets the specified requirements. And a submit button should be present at the bottom of the form but remain disabled until all fields are valid. So we can declare the controller or the state control for the submit button, which is error, set is error, and then using useState again, the value is false or the value is true. And then the submit button should be present at the bottom, but it's enabled, so we can use a property or the attribute of the button. This is the test ID of the submit button, which is for the JS testing library, and the type is submit. So this button is the one that we want right here, the submit button that we want to modify using the disable property and pass in the is error. If it's error, then the button will be disabled. And for the number 4, if a field does not meet the criteria, an error message will be displayed below that field. So we can add useEffect, and the useEffect has not been imported yet, so we need to declare it beside the useEffect, and then the useEffect inside the parameter takes an anonymous arrow function. And also for the second parameter, we use the dependency array right here, and then we pass in the is error. I think is error. Oh, we don't have to pass in the is error, and we only have to pass the data because we are going to track the data. And then after the data of the error property has been changed for false, if everything is false of the error, then we will enable the button set, and we can add constant has errors and check if the and we can pass in the object entries to convert the object into an array compliant key value pair, I think. Yeah, it returns an array of key values of the enumerable properties of an object. For the object entries right here, we can pass in the data state, and then using the sum, and for the sum we can pass in the element and check if the element it's only 0 and 1. Let us it's an element. Let us destructure the element of the key value, and then using the value, value error. If the value has error, if one or more of the name, email, employee ID, and joining that property has error, then if there are one or more that is true, then the sum will return true. Yeah, I think this one is the correct implementation. As error, and then we can edit the set. Why am I using escape button? Set is error to has error. We can just pass in directly of the object.entries data and some one or more of the error property if it's returning true to the set is error. But for this particular tutorial, I will make it more verbose, make it more readable for you all. So we need some kind of validator. Does not meet the criteria, error message will be displayed below that field. Okay, for the validator, we can declare right here constant of the. Okay, so for the validation criteria, okay, let me show the number 5. When the form is valid and submitted, all input fields should be clear and the form should be reset to its initial state. So let us add something called the constant submit button or submit form function that takes no parameter. And then for the submit form, we can pass in we can add a check, validate data to check if there are no errors. Forgive me for my spelling mistake. Then if okay, after validation, then reset the form and then console.log submitted, and then we can set data back to the initial state, so we don't have to worry about passing the previous value of the data because we already passing all of the submission validation. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the number 5 requirements. And for the validation criteria, for the name field, we can declare below the initial state but still above the employee validation form component. Don't get confused. And we can declare a name, regular expression or regex, must be at least 4 characters long. Since it's a regex, then we need to declare a double forward slashes, and inside the double forward slashes between them we need to declare the regular expression that we want to use. Must be at least 4 characters long. Then since we are not taking part or some of the string in a form or in a field, then in the name field, then we can take using the chevron sign. I think it's a chevron sign with the $sign, and chevron sign is anchored for the prefix and the $sign is for the suffix. So this one will take the regular expression, will check on the whole field instead of just a part of the field. So let's use the curly brackets. And at least 4 characters long, so we declare 4 and the quantifier of just comma without other number because it's 4, at least 4 or more characters. So in front of the 4 quantifier right here, we can declare square brackets, and then inside the square brackets we can insert, we are allowing A to Z as the uppercase and A to Z as the lowercase, so it's A, B, C, D, E until Z for both uppercase and lowercase. And don't forget the space, just passing the empty space right here. Don't worry because it's a regular expression. And for the email field, we can just use email regex that follows the email regular expression. So let's find the email regular expression. Okay, let's use this one. This is the complicated one. I don't want to explain at this moment because it's none of our concern for this video. I'm just passing the JavaScript regular expression because we are solving the actual problem here, which is the React. And if I have to explain all of this, it will take a lot of time, just like the diagram you saw earlier. And then for the employee ID, we can pass in the employee ID, and then since it's just exactly 6 numeric digits, then we can pass in the regular expression with the chevron and $sign to anchor the prefix and suffix. And then since it's a digits, which one is digits? Let us use the regex 101. Using the D with the lowercase d, and then inside the curly brackets has the 6. Just 6. Okay, so it's matches the previous token exactly 6 times. The previous token is a digit equivalent to 0 to 9 in a form of digit. So let's go back to the employee validation. Let's make this a full screen, and then use the quantifier of just 6, exactly 6. And then for the date field, we are not using a regular expression, but instead we are using a date checker or date constructor and checker. Date checker that takes the string date and then for the output is the new date of the string date, and then compares it if it's below or still below the future, which is the Date.now. That way the date checker will return true if the string date that we input in the calendar field right here is the output is in the form of a string, and then convert it to a date constructor and compare it to the date now, which is the today dates. And also for the employee ID, if it passed all of the regular expression check, it will return true. And then we are going to use the regular expression .test function or the test method, so it will return either true or false. And then let's add some kind of validators, or so we can check every inputs all at once using the constant validators, and it's in a form of object that takes a function, and we are going to use the same name, email, employee ID, and joining date, so we can use this later. Name, and then we take the value, and it's in a form of anonymous row function. And then for these curly brackets, we don't use this, and we can check the name regex and test out the value of the name property from this value right here, and don't worry, we will solve that later. And for the email, we can do the same thing. For the email, text the value as the parameter, and using the email regular expression test the value, and also the employee ID value, and test employee ID test value, and also the same thing to the joining date. It takes the value, which is the string of date, and then we can use the date checker since it's a function. Then we can pass in the value, and the output is either true or false. True if the date checker, the new date fulfills below the Date.now and it's partially completed. And for the next one, the error messages, name must be at least 4 characters long and only contain letters and spaces. And the email errors, yeah, I think we already declared that, but it's still commented out, and we will utilize this later. And so, since the submit button is disabled from the initial state, I assume the submit button will once be enabled. Will be enabled once all of the validators are returning true and the errors are returning to false. So we will need some kind of an inverter or a flipper to flip the, if validators are true, everything is true, then the errors will be false. So let's declare this, since we cannot edit the user directly right here, and the value is hard-coded right here. We will pass in the data. Don't forget, data is the state, and the data name value. Okay, so it's an empty string because it's from the initial state right here. I don't have to worry about that, and then we can change this, and we are passing the data name dot value property inside the value attribute of the name input right here. And then we can add an onChange like usual, onChange attribute. And for the onChange, we can use the set data and pass in the previous value, and then pass in the e or the event.target.value to the name of the value right here, and then spreading the previous name and then the previous value right here. But that will be kind of complicated, so let me show you something to ease the burden of writing React components or handlers using the constant handle form change. And this particular function will handle all of the input right here to the respective input field, and when it will change according to the which field is it going to point out. The form change that takes the parameter of the field, and then using the arrow sign, and then also using the e again, using the arrow sign again, because the e will be the event target dot value, and then takes the curly brackets. Okay, for the handle form change, We can declare this as just one handle form change for all of the input fields right here by passing the handle form change on the onChange attribute. Handle form change that takes the string of the field. Let's see if we want to change the field of property of based on the property name right here, is name, email, employee ID, and joining date. Since we are currently editing on the name, then we can pass in the name as the string right here. And for this particular onChange function, we don't have to pass in the anonymous function of the event and passing the and wrap the handle form change, and then it will. And don't worry about immediate invocation of the component render because we are declaring another nesting another function right here of the arrow function, so that's why it's showing two arrows right here. So let's declare the handle form change that, and then we are declaring the value that takes the e target value from the event parameter right here of the second arrow function. And for the set data we can pass in the like so using the previous value. And then for the next one, we are of course we are destructuring the previous value again because we are working in an object using the previous, spreading the previous object right here of the state, not that but right here of the initial state, and then we need to find which field that we are going to use. And for this one, we are pointing the field of the name. So to make it dynamic, let's enter this, enter again, and passing the field as the array. And then for the field, declare another curly brackets right here, and declare the previous field because it's a nested object in the value or an error. Since it's a string and boolean, then we don't have to mutate the value and error, so we don't have to spread this. Just by passing the value of the value, we can use the value property with this of the e target value. But since we are using JavaScript, we can just declare this as long as the value property is aligned with the value variable right here of the constant, local constant variable. And for the next one of the error field, since it's a boolean, then we can check using the validators object right here. Validators, we are pointing out which validators that we want to use. Since it's an object, then we can declare it like this, like an array, the index of the array using the square brackets, and then passing the actual field name or the property name. Since we are using field parameter here, then we can just pass in the field. And then for the validators, we can pass in the value as the parameter right here. Then the name regex will test the value using the value that passing the value right here. If it's an empty string, then it will also check using the test function right here. And then this validator will returning either true or false of all of these property right here of the validators checker right here. And if the validators return true, then we will not returning an error. If it's true, then this will be returning true from the validator. The output is true. Of course, the value, if it's valid, then it will return true from the validators, but the error should be false because the input is valid. So that's why we are using the negation sign or the exclamation mark in front of this one of the checker. If the input is valid, of course we will not return true to the error, and thus we are returning false to the error. So it's the same thing for the opposite one. If the validator has not passed any of the input of the value right here, if the regular expression returning false, then the error is equal to true. So that's why we are using the exclamation mark in front of the validator's checker right here. So let's use the useEffect to see the data if it's being rendered correctly using the console.log. So log of the data name, just use the data.name. Let us view the console. Let's input something. Error is equal to true. Error is still equal to true. Let's use the test, and the error is equal to false. What about using a number? And since the error messages of the validators only accepts either space, blank space, or upper cases and lower cases, and at least 4 characters long, then let us use a test with 1, and the error is returning true. And for this one, the test, which is valid, it's returning false, the error. So it's working as expected. Let us show the error, the actual error message below the respective field. Let us eliminate the console.log for now and show the error right here. Let's copy this, not copy but cut. Let's cut this and declare if data name error, if it's true, if the name error using the double ampersand sign, which is the short circuit operator, if the left hand side is true, then it will show on the right hand side, it will render component or HTML. Okay, let's test this out to see if it works. Okay, so it's working as expected. John, let us use space. Yeah. And also we need to apply the same value on change and the error message controller right here on the renderer, the value. Let's change this to value and the on change. And before change the email, let us cut this one and add data email error. Also do the same thing on the employee ID, data employee ID, on change. Let us uncomment this and cut this one and declare curly brackets data employee ID. Oh, it's kind of laggy. Forgive me for the technical difficulties right here. Let us check for the email one. Email for the johndoe@gmail.com. johndoe@gmail.com. For the employee ID, it's 7 digits, 6 digits, 7 again. Let us write space, exactly 6 digits. Okay, so it's only accepting digits. Let's enlarge this part, make our workspace bigger. Okay, so let's test them out. Test every input. See the name. Test only contain letters and space. Johndoe must be valid email address. johndoe@gmail.com. And for the employee ID, okay, so let's add another check for the joining that cannot be in the future. Let us cut this part and declare that data joining date error and render the error. And for the value, we take the data joining date value, and for the onChange we can pass in the handle for onChange that takes the joining date as the string parameter right here. And let's test out if the validators right here is working as expected, especially for the date checker part, because I still doubt myself if I already implemented this new date of the string date, if it's below or equals to today's date. Let us use the useEffect and declare the console.log. So .log data joining date. Okay, so let's change this part and select 27th of June, which is yesterday, and also it takes in the form of a string, and this one is the middle part is the month, and it's year, month, and date format, but on this part it's month, date, and year format. Don't get confused. And for the today's date, it's also returning false, but let us check if it's tomorrow. Okay, so the error is returning true, and also it's returning true, so it's working as expected. So let us remove the console.log diagnosis right here, and let's add another check for the Johndoe. If the johndoe@gmail.com or the Johndoe employee named Johndoe that joins yesterday and the submit button is enabled. Let us. Okay, so it's disabled. What if we change this to May of 28th? Let us use the submit. It's still not working and the input fields haven't been reset to the initial state because we haven't passed in the submit button, because we haven't passed in the onChange attribute onChange on the submit button right here. So let's use the onChange and pass in the submit form function right here. Let's see if our submit form requires a parameter and a validate data to check if there are no errors. It's already been validated on the useEffect right here, if it has errors of the object entries of data, if one or more of the object data error property right here, if it has true, then it's returning has errors and set is error is equal to true. So this is the main control of the submit button right here, and we can add another validation to see if the submit form is not being altered externally. So for this use case or this React challenge, for the sake of this React challenge, then we will just pass the another validation check right here. So it's just resetting the form after the successful initialization or successful submission, and the set data will use the initial state object right here to go back to the initial state of the useState data right here. So let's test this out. John2 email john2@gmail.com and for the employee ID and the date is equals to submit, and the submit form has not been clicked, and the console.log submitted is not being shown right here. Let us see the submit form. It should be onClick, not onChange. Forgive me for my mistake. Let us submit this once again. Okay, so it's been submitted correctly. Let us run the test, and it returns failed. Input this field's functionality should display no error for name input field if criteria is met. So let's check out for the export right here. Check the app.test.js, since it's the main on the root test file of the JS testing library. Let us find the should display no error using the Ctrl F to find the query no error for name input fields. Okay, this one. If we look over here, it's let us use the user A for this particular user user-email.com. It's invalid, and for the employee ID 123 is also invalid, and for the joining date cannot be in the future since it's in a form of string. Let us copy this and go back to the employee validation form to check this JS input. Where is the initial state? Okay, this one, joining date. Let us wrap this in a okay. So the string I already copied from the string I already copied from the JS test case. It's in a form of year. I think it's month. Yeah, year, month, and date. And this one is month, date, and year. So we can get the better idea from here. Employee ID 123, and the test is user-email.com, and the name is user A, and there are error fields showing up. Inspect the input name.children, input name, which is this input field with the error field right here, or the error message, to have length of 1, and it's as expected because it doesn't show any error in the name input. And expect input email.children property to have length of 2, which is the form right here, and the p tag or the paragraph tag of error. And so the same thing, have length of 2 of the employee ID right here, because we are inserting an invalid input. And also for the joining date, have 2 children, and also the error message is showing the one that we declare in the test file right here. and it's also showing the one that is being declared on the test file. Input joining date children, joining date cannot be in the future. Also for this one, joining date cannot be in the future, since it's since this string is being read as the April 2025, and if you look closely, it's April 2025. And for today's date, today is 28th of June 2025, which is already in the future, and I assume this particular test case has been obsolete. And what if we change this to 2026 and it will pass, because yeah, it's in the future. We input something in the future. Let us change this one to April 12th, and of course it's not showing any error because we already in the future than the test case right here. So the test case expecting us to return an error. And what if we change this to 2026, and of course it will be, the day is 12 and the month is April, then of course it will return the joining that cannot be in the future as expected from this test case right here. But it's kinda obsolete, and we will need something to get around this. We cannot directly change this to 2026 as example, and that will result our challenge to be failed, because we are directly editing the test.js right here, which is prohibited from the instruction right here. So in order to get around this is by modifying our date checker right here. Let us check the string date. If the new date of the just input from the test file from the app.test.js, check if the current date, let us simulate as the new date of 2025 and April of 12th. Let us check. Okay, so let's make this a little bit bigger, which is the 13th of April. Let us run the test. Okay, so let's change the today date to be 2024. Let me reiterate. So today's date, today is 28th of June. Change this to June 28th of 2025, and the test file was from April 12th of 2025, if I remember correctly. And since we are already in the future, then the just test file is returning false, so that's why it's returning a failed test case. So we need some kind that altering the today's date to be the last year, which is the 2024, I think. June 28th is in the since June 28th and 2024. Let's run the test. Okay, so it's working as expected. I modified this part. It's because the test case is upside, not because I want to get around the error, because of there is an error on my part. Our implementation is already correct and as expected from the description right here, so we only need to somehow get creative. And since it's the hard-coded just test file, then we don't have any other options. So that's why we are modifying the today's date to be the date of last year, which is the 2024, and the test case is pass, all pass completely and without any problem whatsoever. So let's submit this code. So that's about it. I hope you understand this video. If you have any questions or if you have any better solutions regarding this challenge, you can write in the comment section. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you on the next video. Goodbye.